Hello, and welcome back to the Calm and Connected podcast. I'm your host, Janine Halloran, and today is the next in my book series from the summer, where I'm talking about different books that I would recommend for you to read as part of the summer reading series. So today I'm going to talk about a book that I read over COVID, actually. You know, we all have those to be read piles that get bigger and bigger, and this is one of those books that I had been wanting to read for a very long time. And I finally used the opportunity that COVID gave me to read this book. It's called The Highly Sensitive Child by Elaine N, and you'll see all my little notes there. It was one of those books that changed the way that I look at kids, and just like Ross Greene's The Explosive Child, it really was sort of a game changer for me in the way that I thought about the different sorts of kids that I see, and thinking through the lens of, are they highly sensitive? So it was a really interesting book, and I had not really heard a lot about high sensitivity. Like, I'd heard the term sort of thrown around, but I didn't really understand what it was. And that's why I really wanted to read the book, because I felt like something that I could potentially be seeing in my clients and seeing with my own kids. So I just wanted to understand what it was. And so pretty early on in the book, Elaine goes into the 4 areas that cover what it means to be a highly sensitive person. So she uses the acronym D.O.E.S. So D is depth of processing. So you process a lot. There's a lot of thinking that happens for a person who has high sensitivity. O is overwhelmed. So being easily overwhelmed. If there's a lot of things happening at once, you get overwhelmed, you shut down. E is emotionally reactive, but also high empathy. So it's both of those things. So really big emotions. So that means you feel good, you feel happy really big, but sometimes you feel mad really big. But the other thing is you're very highly attuned to other people around you, and have a lot of empathy for others around you as well. And S, being aware of subtle stimuli. So you're very aware of sense, noises, sounds, fabric, the way that it feels, those sorts of things. So you tend to notice more in your environment, and you tend to think deeply before reacting. She also talks about the people who have high sensitivity are more impacted by pain, by stimulant medication, by medications in general, and have more reactive immune systems and have a tendency to have more allergies, which I found fascinating. And so there is a little quiz at the beginning of the book where it goes through for children, where as the parent or the adult who's taking care of the child or raising the child, you can go through and circle the true or false statements. And it's really like, is this what I'm seeing with my child? Is this accurate to them? And I think it's 23 questions. And if you answer 13 or more true, then the child could be considered highly sensitive. Now, it is just a screening, just like you screen for anxiety, just because you screen for highly sensitive and you don't quite meet the threshold, but you're seeing a lot of big reactions, and a lot of the things are really resonating for you when it comes to your child, then there's a possibility that they still could be. You know, it's one data point. It's one of those things that could be really helpful in terms of having a different lens for looking at children. And that's why, again, it was such a big life and game changer for me when I think about children. It's sort of like a temperament. So 15 to 20% of people are said to be highly sensitive. There's a lot more research coming out about it, and it's really interesting because it seems like it's sort of like you have it or you don't. Like, there is sort of like no in between of like, oh, I could be or I couldn't be. It's like you really understand it and feel it when you read the words and you are hearing all of the things that it could be, and related to being highly sensitive. So it's one of those things. So, like, for instance, I'll read just a couple of the questions for the parent questionnaire and see if it resonates for you. So, my child startles easily. My child complains about scratchy clothing, seams in socks, or labels against his or her skin. Doesn't usually enjoy big surprises, learns better from a gentle correction than strong punishment, seems to read my mind, uses big words for his or her age, notices the slightest unusual odor, has a clever sense of humor, those sorts of things. So I found it to be really interesting. And for me, when I read it, and as I was reading the book and I was reading the descriptions of both, thinking through a lens of a child and the lens of a parent, I was thinking first, I see my son in this, and I also see myself in this. So it was really interesting to read that and to understand that is part of, I think, who I am as a person. Like, I tend to be a highly sensitive person. And it's interesting. Elaine Aron in the book talks about some different career choices that people who have high sensitivity go into. So those people tend to be scientists, counselors, theologians, historians, lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, and artists. So, and she says that a couple of times throughout the book. So I'm just fascinated by that. And it made me think through actually some of the people that I've worked with in the past. And I'm like, oh gosh, I wonder if they were highly sensitive too. So like I said, there you can use the questionnaire. If you go to hsperson.com, that's where Elaine Aron's work is online. So you can read more about the highly sensitive child, but she also has other books. So like the highly sensitive person, the highly sensitive person in love, really interesting sort of a way to think through, like, how do you interact? But let's get back to the highly sensitive child. So in this book, what I enjoy about it is that it goes through and gives you some ways to think about parenting from the lens of having a highly sensitive child. So you go through and she talks about how you do this as a parent who has high sensitivity and a parent who does not have high sensitivity, and the different benefits and bonuses that it can bring to have somebody who has that same sort of highly sensitive personality to the table when it comes to parenting, and then how it's also beneficial to have the non-highly sensitive parent there as well. And so it's really a neat way to think through, and just a different sort of lens to use. And the other part of the book goes through developmental ages and stages. So, when you're parenting different ages and stages, you need different strategies. And so she starts with preschool, and then she goes up into school age, and then goes into tween and teen years to give some strategies and suggestions of things that could be helpful when working with children of that age range who have high sensitivity, who are highly sensitive. So I found it to be really interesting. I really enjoyed it. And I think about it a lot. And it actually helps me think through different strategies that I've used with my own children. Like, what I would do with my daughter didn't necessarily work with my son. And it was just really interesting to actually see that played out in the book as well. Like, just reading it, and like, oh, that's why it did work for him, and it didn't really matter as much for her. So she has a lot of good work, Elaine Aron. So if you go over to hsperson.com, you can learn more about that. And I was recently even interviewed in a community about raising highly sensitive kids. So a colleague of mine, Maureen, has created an entire website and resources for people who have children who are highly sensitive. So it's called thehighly-sensitivechild.com. And over there, she also has a community, just like I do. And so she is interviewing different speakers about different things. So I spoke about coping skills, obviously, in there, and things that we can do to help our highly sensitive kids. You can get resources. If this is something that you are learning about, if this is something that is interesting to you, if this is something that you think might be going on for one of your children, there are resources out there. So I would definitely look into HS Person and Elaine Aron's work. There's good research happening around highly sensitive people right now. And then you can also get support with Maureen as well over at thehighly-sensitivechild.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment and share it with your friends and colleagues. And as always, don't forget about yourself. Take a few minutes, have a little fun, and have an awesome day.